Thank you all.
Shivani, that was very powerful, very beautiful, and very, very moving. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. I would now like to request Professor Vishwanathan to come on stage and talk to us about colors of imperialism, memory, diversity, and the future of Champaran. Thank you.
I must begin with a toast to the magic of film and the poetics of dance, because the social scientist is a grubby character, suspicious, seedy, always wondering whether this is the truth. And that moment of memory, which is a moment of commemoration, which is a moment of reverence, one must raise a question mark. Because social science is about suspicion. Did it really happen this way? You know, when I read the records of the Champaran reports, by the time you read 400 pages, you're bored silly. And you wonder, is this the true narrative? Is it just a legal record? Is it just an investigation? And then you read the great works on Champaran. Jack Puchapadas. You read Prakash Kumar on science. You read Venu Govind on the whole idea of 100 years of Champaran. And you wonder whether Champaran is not a frozen event of history. I think you have to ask this question, because these authorities make Champaran into a canonical event, frozen in its inflexibility. It's history, but it's actually a failure of storytelling, because Champaran didn't happen that way. I'm sorry, social scientists are always anticlimactic. Let me state my method. Umberto Eco, a great novelist, an even greater semiotician, once had a book titled The Open Work. He said, sometimes you have to write a music composition in a way that the individual player has the right of interpretation, the right of flexibility. And he called this the open work. What we have had so far is Champaran is the closed work. I think on the 100th year of Champaran, it's time we open it. Give it a flexibility, make it possible to provide the heuristics of the future rather than the mechanics of the past. I think this is very important. Because when you read Champaran, you find it's frozen. You read 400 pages, all you have is a lawyer's document. It wasn't such a great victory. I'm sorry. Yet what made Champaran historic? I think in a way, the seeds of that suspicion are here. In fact, if you read the history, it's tedious, it's boring, it's bureaucratic. What happened at Champaran? Was it the magic of a place? Was it the magic of a substance, indigo? Or was it the magic of a man, Gandhi? And then you realize it's none of the three. Because if you look at the narrative behind the formal historical narrative, beyond the legal records, meticulous in their specificity, is gossip and rumor. Champaran is not history. Champaran is the creativity of rumor. In fact, if you look at the reports, the standard report, logical, almost inflexibly legal, is surrounded by two other reports. The suspicion of the policeman and the gossip of the peasant. The policeman can't understand Gandhi. He said, how did this guy land up? How did this guy land up and think he can talk to the kings and generals? They in fact say the very act of Champaran is the end of the imperial regime. It has nothing to do with indigo. Here is a guy who knows very dramatics, changes the rules of the game. He's a grammarian who understands how to undermine imperialism. Indigo is a pretext for a deeper text. But what creates Gandhi? Gandhi is still a hypothesis, a bit of suspicion from South Africa. And I think the beauty of Indian history is it's not written in textualities. It is written in the oral memory of the peasant. And if you look at the police records, you get a totally different story. The police suspect that the peasant is the one who understands Gandhi because the peasant is the one who invented Gandhi. Gandhi was invented at Champaran that day. He was invented by the gossip and rumor of the peasant who called him the new Malik. In fact, if you look at the police reports, they are highly paranoid, suspicious. In fact, they say this is the beginning of a new millennial movement, and Gandhi is the magician of that movement. At one level, they say the peasant is illiterate. And then they realize the power of rumor. Because Champaran is all rumor. Rumor recorded by the police. Thank God for police records. They capture the seediness of suspicion and the magic of hope because it's the peasantry that invents Gandhi. Gandhi was invented that day. You read the records, there's nothing impressive about Gandhi. I'm sorry, the documentary doesn't stand. What really stands is, here is a guy who almost speaks like as if he's addressing the Rotary Club meeting of East London. Here is a guy who's talking one-to-one to the monarchs. But the way the peasants are interpreting it is different. They say, once Gandhi comes, we won't have to pay taxes to the British. And the police realize the beauty of it because he says the peasant, who was utterly respectful to the English, no longer think the English have prestige. The English have lost their mana, their magic. And the next day, the peasant refuses to pay taxes. And the police can't understand how this respectable, almost, deeply obsequious creature becomes the rebel. The beauty of Gandhi is not in the chemistry of indigo. Indigo doesn't exist in the document, by the way. I've never seen a document which was more indifferent to the color of indigo. You read 600 pages, there's nothing on indigo. It's about the beauty of gossip, the power of rumor to create history. It's not about chemistry. It's not about Champaran, some out-of-the-way place in history, as the document itself calls it. It's about how the peasant, in his illiteracy, invents Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Because the peasant is confident that once Gandhi is invented, he'll continue reinventing himself. That was the power of the document. You read it carefully. Gandhi hardly appears in the document. In fact, he is the other of the document because people don't know how to make sense of him. You think he is making sense of indigo, then you realize that actually the peasant, the planter, and the policeman is trying to make sense of Gandhi. I sat and read the document 6 times because I was wondering what the historians were talking about. They wanted to give it a facticity that tells you about the exploitation. But that is the trouble with this document. Champaran is a double document. At one level, it's a 19th century document that marks a Marxist political economy. But it is actually a 21st century document which talks about the new kinds of imperialism. The imperialism of chemistry, the imperialism of obsolescence. The imperialism where in one little laboratory you can destroy a multiple world. The silences are clear. But Champaran, in fact, in a distinct sense, is a Derridian hinge. It's two narratives juxtaposed to each other. We play out the 19th century document. In fact, the documentary is 19th century. The peasant is 19th century. By the 21st century, the peasant has got back to his inventiveness. He invents a Gandhi Raj. And he's convinced that Gandhi is the new Malik, that the British are doomed. In fact, if you look at the police records of rumors, in fact, it's the most fascinating part of the report. What is the dullest part of the report? Indigo. It doesn't exist, except as an example of the exploitation of the farmer. And then you get the magic of Champaran. There's a double narrative, one historical, specific, prosaic, suspicious, seedy. But behind it is the poetics of rumor. And I wish we'd give rumor and gossip a greater place in the poetry of our lives. Because that is exactly what the peasant does. And if you remove the sections on indigo and only look at the language, gossip and rumor of the peasants, you get the poetry of a different kind of politics. A peasant dreaming of a millenarian movement, dreaming of a new leadership, and creating a fit between the peasantry and the new leadership. In fact, I'm very suspicious of even the reports of Rajendra Prasad and Rajkumar Shukul. Because you read it and you say, something too good about them. Sorry, social scientists, I love seediness. But if you look at it, after a while you realize, in a novelistic sense, they're templates for a future Gandhi. Shukul is the peasant when he's not really a peasant. He's a moneylender, if you actually check up the facts. And Rajendra Prasad is the ethical professional. And out of the persistent peasant and the ethical professional, you create a futuristic Gandhi. They're novellas to a future. Because the facts don't tally with the kind of presentations made, but you realize what is being created here is the beauty of a myth. A myth that became history, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. So the first part of the alchemy is nothing about indigo. In fact, as soon as Gandhi becomes recognized, what you have is a battle between the colors of nationalism and the colors of imperialism. Also starkly disappointing in an aesthetic sense. Because the color of imperialism is the color of khaki. And in fact, khaki, if you look at the history and origins, is about a collective drabness. History of khaki says, khaki is a collection of several kinds of drabness which can actually create camouflage. It's mechanical, it covers the panopticon. But what does Gandhi offer as opposite of khaki? Khadi. Equally colorless, an unaesthetic white. And I think we have to see this debate in terms of how the national movement looked at it. Let me just give 3 examples in the half an hour I have. P.C. Ray, a great chemist. He writes an article in the Journal of Physical Chemistry, in the Journal of Applied and Physical Chemistry. He says, synthetic chemistry is an act of rishihood. Synthetic chemistry, the word he uses is an act of tapas. And it's out of the tapas of the chemical laboratories that Bayer constructs indigo. And Kumaraswamy, who was impressed by P.C. Ray earlier because he was one of the great authorities on Hindu chemistry, who went through the old alchemical texts to find out about various forms of chemistry and color, is irritated. He almost feels that Ray has a sense of fear and trembling before synthetic chemistry. And he says, you got to understand, synthetic chemistry is about the new proletarianism. And taking over from Marx, remember Kumaraswamy was a socialist, he said, a proletarian is any man who's disembedded from his culture, from his language, from color. And what we see in Indigo is the proletarianization of color. Till then, the national movement has no theory of color. And in fact, that is the complaint about Khadi. If you look at the records, the debates between the two great protagonists, Gandhi and Tagore, it's fascinating. Gandhi says it's ethical. And Tagore says, I've never seen anything as mechanical as Khadi. You reproduce the same thing in every village. Then reading closer, I realized what Tagore was saying. Khadi lacks a sense of the erotic. And without erotic, there's no color. Khadi is colorless. A colorless ethics is not convincing enough. Remember, these nationalists quarrel beautifully among themselves. The Bengal School of Art, which then tried to work out color, fails, despite Nandlal Bose. In fact, oddly, it's once again the eccentrics who return color back to the national movement, the theosophists. Two of them in particular. Kandinsky, who works out a new theory of the spiritual idea of color, where each color has a spiritual coloring. And Nikolai Roerich, who in his journal Flamma tries to talk about the occult power of color. Gandhi never paid attention to these people. It's a pity, because in the end, nationalism as a philosophy and the Gandhian idea of Champaran is left colorless. It's illiterate about color. It's brilliant on ethics. But an ethics without an aesthetics is incomplete. And it's in this context that I want to say, if you look at the 400, 500 pages of Champaran, there's nothing Gandhian about it. It's hard political economy. There's nothing about the body. There's only something about labor. There's nothing about color. There's nothing about aesthetics. So what I'm trying to say is, Champaran as a heuristic is incomplete. To freeze it as a document and present it in a museumized form won't do. Because Champaran is a hypothesis Gandhi wanted us to complete. And I think the only way you can complete it is by writing a Hind Swaraj for color. I know the orthodox will complain, but Gandhi was playful. He had a tremendous sense of humor. In fact, one of my favorite jokes is about the time Jamanlal Bajaj, correct me if I'm wrong, gave him a car which went around the ashram for 2 weeks and collapsed. And then it was drawn by 2 sets of capital. And Gandhi would say, look at my Oxford. The guy who could laugh this way demands a different kind of attention. And I want to return the playfulness of Gandhi by saying Hind Swaraj is an incomplete document. And Champaran is only a hypothesis which we have to convert into a heuristics of the future. We need a Hind Swaraj of color, where the different ideas of nationalism combine in a rainbow way to create a different idea of aesthetics. Because when you separate ethics from aesthetics, politics from ethics, something remains incomplete in the national movement. A Tagore is left defenseless against the ethical power of Gandhi. And I think we have to bring them together. Patrick Geddes tried it at Shantiniketan and failed, because Shantiniketan was not a university for artists. It was a dream of a new science, which Geddes couldn't complete. Look at the records. Only the artistic part survives. So what do we need? when he said there's a new Hind Swaraj for color in the drabness of a Modi era. I mean, the khaki shorts is about the worst combination of nationalism and imperialism I can think of. We need an aesthetic critique, which is also an ethical sensibility. So you have to begin with a theory of diversity. In fact, brilliantly, when I was a young child, by the great physicist K.S. Krishnan. He one day came home, loved to gossip with children, put my sister on his lap. She was wearing a red pawada. And he said, which color is this? And my sister, convent school style, says, red. He smiles and switches to Tamil and says, Illa, no, Shehepu. Shehepu in Tamil transcends the rednessness of a provincial red. We dreamt of red in different ways. Anand Kumar of Tamil, in fact, said, you can't have a synthetic dye because the redness of red varies with every village. Diversity against standardization. Community against obsolescence. Something which combines the heuristics of ethics with aesthetics. In fact, that's what Kumaraswamy said. The trouble with chemistry is that it's a theory of innovation without a theory of ethics. Can we combine memory and history, memory and community, memory and the future to create a new Hind Swaraj for color? Otherwise, the two narratives you had and mine will always be separate. We need a new kind of storytelling because Champaran is a failure of storytelling. Historians will shoot me, but they were disgustingly inadequate in that movement. It needs a different poetry. And I think the time has come now not to remember Champaran in terms of invocations, but in terms of the new inventions of the future. Gandhi wrote Hind Swaraj in 1904. We need a new Hind Swaraj for color. Color is a dream of diversity. Color is a heuristics for a different kind of innovation. Color is memory. You know, I remember Swaminathan and Octavio Paz talking. I've just come back from Mexico. And they both say, green has to be redefined. The dictionary green isn't green anymore. You have to dream a new aesthetics within the idea of a civilizational India which gives you a new ethics. We need a new Hind Swaraj. And that's what Champaran is telling us. What began as rumor became a hypothesis, became a heuristic with the peasant. But I think it's time for middle-class India to invent a new Hind Swaraj which goes beyond globalism, to give us a new interpretation of the pluralism of color. That was the dream of the 1890 group, which Octavio Paz recognized, which Swaminathan founded with other people in Baroda. I think it's a dream today. The museumization of Champaran won't do. And let's remember, the man who fought the museum most was our greatest aesthetic critic, Anand Kumaraswamy. He said the museum smells of death and formaldehyde. Champaran smells of middle-class contempt for the peasant. If you read the requirements, dialogues of Gandhi and Rajkumar Shukla, he's contemptuous of Shukla. He's still the middle-class lawyer. The new Gandhi we have needs a new Hind Swaraj. But I think he left it to us to invent. And today, the new Tagores, the new Gandhis, have to get us a new theory of color as diversity, as a new kind of phenomenology, as a new way of constructing a sensorium which we lack today. Dalits have a sense of it. I'm not interested in the Dalit theory of caste. It might sound too Brahminic by saying this. I'm interested in the Dalit theory of music and color. I remember one of my Dalit friends saying, smart cities to hell. The minute you smell a city, you can change the nature of urban planning. The stink is of a different order. The color is of a different order. We need what the Theosophists said, that each color is spiritual. And the colors of spiritualism will give us a new Champaran. Indigo, which has been colorless since then, will acquire the variety of color that calls it blue. I remember hearing about the last great indigo weaver, Yellappa. And I remember Yellappa never used a technical instrument. He would come in, sort of lick his thumb, and say, yes, the vat is ready. And I remember three of my friends who were great, outstanding people at that time saying, you know, when you saw Yellappa's indigo, you forgot all about Fab India. This indigo was the indigo we wanted to steal. And the only tribute to Gandhi is to recover the colors of indigo as the colors of nationalism. I'll stop here. Thank you. I've been told I'm subject to questions for 10 minutes.
And museum has a role to play in the history. You can't discard everything. We need some substance for the future. So there are everything in the history needs some place. We have to recognize everything. And when you say gossiping and rumors, there is a bit of untruth behind it. If you say gossiping, there may be some untruth. What is the untruth behind this Champara? It changed the whole perception of the farmers, and they looked at not Malik, but God. Why they changed that situation immediately? What happened? That Gandhi we need. How he changed the farmers, become a fearless. The first time they met a man, he said no to the Britishers, the British officials. Then he became a god for them. And that historical change, that we need to imbibe. And even today, that time, Kaki versus Khadi, even today, Kaki versus Khadi is still alive. What is the answer?
A Hind Swaraj for color. With deep respect, I think gossip contains an element of truth, which your theology doesn't. Because, you know, while you say everything in cliches, I think, what are you saying which is new about Gandhi? First, let's be clear. Gandhi is going to go despite you. Yeah, definitely. So let's be clear about that. Okay. Gandhi is going to grow despite you and me. But I think, okay, maybe let me put it in the form of a joke. One of my favorite journalists, let's begin with Gandhi's confidence, which you emphasize. When the American journalist asks him, what do you think of Western civilization? He says it would be a good idea. O.B. Vijayan, years later, did a cartoon of Gandhi stumbling back to India. And someone asked him, what do you think of Indian civilization? And he says, that would also be a good idea. And I think that is what's missing. I don't think we have an ethics of civilization today. We have an ethics of nationalism, We have an idea of planning, we have a notion of Western economics, but you don't have that. What Kumaraswamy said is, I'm not against the museum. Remember, he spent all his time in the Boston Museum. He said, I'm against museumization. And the question he asked is, quoting a Sinhala journalist, if God were to return back today and ask were the Aztecs, Incas, or the Australian Aborigines here, would the Western man take him to a museum? There's a different notion of tradition. There's a different notion about a responsibility for life. And a museum, in being an aesthetic, humanistic entity, lacks that ethics. Any anthropologist will tell you that. Today with development, we are museumizing of people. Watch every traffic light where tribals and nomads stand there, decultured. I think we owe them a different responsibility. And what the aesthetics of color is saying, India needs a new social contract between the tribal, the nomad, the peasant, and the industrial system. Many of this was rudimentally present in Gandhi. We have to build it up. So the only way I can be loyal to Gandhi is not by being critical, but by being inventive. I need my gossip and my myth of Gandhi when the facts are still lagging behind. For me, gossip and rumor contain a beautiful element of truth, which others would call poetry.
Thank you, Shiv. Provocative as always and entrancing as always. Just had a comment.
That's the polite part.
You know, your white shirt set against the saffron or orange marigolds contained a certain paradox. I mean, a certain politics of color. You might want to think about that at some point. You talked about the pluralism of color. Could I request you to comment on the colors of pluralism? That's one. And the second is that you did talk about the fact that a new aesthetic and Gandhi's imprint on that. Would it be absolutely sacrilegious to suggest that perhaps Gandhi introduced an asceticism into aesthetics, which goes contrary to what you are really, in some senses, advocating? Third, I wish you would do a series for SIT on potential conversations based on the Hind Swaraj of color with Gandhi and Geddes, Gandhi and Ananda Kumaraswamy, and most importantly, because you're doing so much work in Kashmir, Gandhi and a Burhan Wani. What would that conversation in the context of the pluralism of color look like?
Yeah, I started thinking about it. Do you think the Sufi idea of Kashmir and the Wahhabi idea of Kashmir is the same in terms of color? You know, what I'm trying to say is, I think color has been appropriated. Why does the BJP own saffron? I want to appropriate it back. I want to redefine color. I want to think of other possibilities for color. And that's what Swaminathan said. A green which is only sort of uniformly green gives you a dull environmentalism. I want a new aesthetic for green. The possibilities are there. They're dreams of a different kind, the same way the peasant did. Hind Swaraj was a dream. Then the only way I can talk of a dream is to redream it in terms of my colors. I have no objection to Gandhi's aesthetics, because in a way it was taken from Tolstoy, with a touch of Ruskin. Nothing innovation there. But I think what was important was he brought simplicity. Nandad Bose, in fact, interpreted you in a more interesting way. He said, Gandhi said, any life is an art form. And therefore it's interesting. But Gandhi had no real sense of color. He had faith in certain kinds of things. But I think the possibilities of a new aesthetics for science, a new ethics for science, a new idea of aesthetics about art, maybe going back to Kumaraswamy's distinct saying art, there's no such thing as an artist. Every man in the pursuit of art is a special kind of artist. I think we redefine certain aesthetic roles. I would be aesthetic when it comes to giving me an aesthetics of sustainability. Gandhi would be a very good beginning, where ethics and aesthetics would give you a different sense of the greenness of green. Sustainability. Yeah. I want to thank you for that comment. 2 days ago, I got a letter from a woman who said, don't ruin my breakfast with your English. I sympathize, but I'm not highbrow. I'm looking for a high space within which ordinary ideas can be articulated in a different way. If that's highbrow, let me play it. Yes. Oh, I think my English is quite ordinary. At least my sisters thought so. Yeah, I think we have to respond to that. Yeah.
Sir, it has been, of course, a very provocative presentation. I believe the most important message that I got about the Champaran is that this was the very first instance of Gandhi's demonstration of non-violence. The non-violent method of how he could do something for the oppressed, long-suffering peasants. So the color of non-violence, I think to me is the dominant color that emerges from this Champaran episode.
You read the records. No, if you read the records, there is no such great narrative of non-violence. I'm sorry. It's created by peasant myths and rumors. This epoch of non-violence you're creating. If you look at Gandhi's reaction to many of the fires that took place as a result of peasant responses to planters, there's an ambivalence. I'm sorry. The myth of non-violence came afterwards, and brilliantly so, because the peasant realized the ethics and potentiality of a Gandhi. But if you're saying it was resident in the Champaran documents, maybe I agree with it. Yeah. Anuradha, I was waiting.
I think the problem with diversity, which Gandhi did address and which we need to readdress perhaps, is the fear that diversity will disintegrate into relativism, and where there would be nothing to address. And that is the fear not just of Modi but of all nation states, which would then, and of globalization, of the new imperialism that you talk of, which is to make everything uniform so that then you can have an object to address. So I wonder how you will.
Well, I'll quote the man who was one of the first advocates of Indian independence, Alfred Wallace, who was also probably the greatest advocate of diversity. He said, diversity is the only way you can break hegemony. Because once you have a pluralistic world, it is ethically important even for science to invent alternatives. Because by inventing alternatives, you sustain the plurality of imagination, and you stop hegemony from freezing thought. Alfred Wallace was the great scientist of the Indian national movement. If you look at the Theosophist records, and Gandhi was a distinct part of Theosophy at that time. I think this fear of diversity comes mainly with the nation state and a Western idea of citizenship. I think we could do with a bit of diversity, more of it, because I don't think we have those kind of fears. It's only with the nation state, only with the Western model of development, that fear of diversity comes in the way you're talking about. Now, if you say that is a modern problem, how would we give a civilizational answer? That might be a more interesting question. it's more than that. I think many of them felt he threatened them and their comfortable universes. Ashish Nande has a fascinating story about the number of people who still send money orders to Nathuram Godse's family. Why? But I think this anti-Gandhi you're speaking about comes from a particular kind of nationalism. And a nationalism with its assets. You know, again, taking a story that Ashish talked about, one of his friends talks about a meeting with a partition refugee. And he immediately talks about the train to Pakistan, the train to Amritsar in this sense. And after each interview, you realize that the man was exactly 3-year-old in the partition. He had inherited his grandfather's memory. There's a certain kind of ersatz memory present in many of these anti-Gandhians. In fact, it was put in a brilliant way recently when about 5 years ago, 8 years ago, when there was a discussion on the 2002 riots at IIT. One of the girls got up and said, "At last, 500 years of Mughal rule has been defeated." I think Gandhi was much more secular about certain notions of memory, which today's nationalism isn't. Gandhi threatens the current nation state. I don't blame them for being insecure.
May I say thank you? Bye-bye. Thank you. I didn't understand, but I should try.
I will say a thank you in simple English too. Thank you. Yeah.
See, I love your talk. It's thought provoking. In your the framework of the aesthetic and the ethical, having a binary position. Whenever somebody used to question Gandhi for the authority of thinking and being so, he would recall the idea of the consciousness, the inner voice, higher being. Now, how does social science replace this? Because he would never rest on in text, etc. Anything, he would always say that it is because of my inner voice, the call of conscience. Now, as a social scientist, in our approach to have a new hermeneutic of reinventing God, where you have these aesthetics and the ethics, that they come together, how do you place this inner voice, conscience, or higher being?
Oh, the idea that the social science doesn't have inner voice is suspect.
I would say that.
No, I'm just saying, so let me first bring it back. That a notion of method also needs a notion of ethics. And social science for a while followed a kind of false scientism, which tried to create a value-free sociology. I think the return to values in science, in social science, is possibly the biggest tribute to Gandhi. It's the other way around. We are not separating. We're trying to see whether these dualisms can combine in a new way. And that's the excitement of the new social science. You can try anyone you like, from Isabel Stenger in physics to the new kind of work being done in social science. It's not a dualism anymore. They realized the havoc dualism caused. And what they wanted a new idea of a dialogic social science. I think Raimundo Panikkar articulated it brilliantly at one time.
Friends, tonight we've had a very enriching experience, and I thank all of you for being here and for all those involved with making this program a success. As managing trustee, I'm here to propose the vote of thanks, especially to Professor Shiv Vishwanathan, and you can see that his talk on the colors of imperialism, future of Champaran. He has a style of gripping his audience with his very revealing and provocative, sort of interpretations. and especially the question of Champaran as being the heuristic of the future, the magic, the question of the alchemy of color. And it's wonderful to have an audience that's interactive. Thank you so much, Shiv, for being here. But let us also hope that we are able to fulfill our dream of the pluralism of colors. I thank also Mr. Annamalai, Director, National Gandhi Museum, for his great cooperation in making this program a success, and for the screening of the film, because it was the film that opened up the whole, I think, the program very adequately and absolutely to the T. I think the issues followed from one another. We've had a very moving dedication to the Mahatma by performing artist Shivani Verma, who's contributed to this theme of harmony through the bhajans of Gandhi. On behalf of us all, I thank Shivani and her artists for the wonderful rendition. Today, I'd also like to say how grateful we are to have our new trustees of the main body of Sarvodaya International Trust for being here with us, Ambassador Retired Mrs. Shashi Uban Tripathi. I thank you very much for being here. I also thank Ambassador Mr. Dinesh Kumar Jain. I'm not sure that you're here. Thank you for being here tonight. I would also like to congratulate Dr. A.K. Merchant for having been co-opted as trustee of Sarvodaya and thank him for his great service to the Sarvodaya International Trust New Delhi chapter. Thank you, Dr. Merchant. So the New Delhi chapter makes efforts to invigorate Gandhian ideals through meaningful observances, and this is one such occasion. I'd like to accord today my deep appreciation on behalf of all the trustees to Mrs. Sukanya Bharatram for having inspired today's program and help us in organizing it. Many, many thanks to our very meticulous chairperson, Mrs. Indira Verma, for her guidance and support. It was encouraging and heartening to have you as audience. I thank the IIC who make each year the effort for making sure that all arrangements go very, very well for all of us. And many thanks to the program officers in particular. I'm also, last but not least, it says family hold back. Right. Last but not least, I'm very grateful to the staff of Springdale's Dhola Kua for their contribution and for making this event possible. Thank you all and good night.
Give
Lovely, lovely.
I was telling when I was sharing your this thing, Facebook.
Yeah.